Welcome back to the Horror Academic for this first Sci-Fi Academic episode of the new year. You know, the end of the year, the big movie that was I was looking forward to was the new Matrix. So in the future, when you're watching this, I've probably seen that movie by now. But leading up to that, I decided to go back and revisit the Matrix Trilogy. So about 2 years ago, I had bought this UK edition Matrix Trilogy box set because I could not find a domestic. They wanted me to buy either the original only or the two as a 2-pack. I could not find a trilogy set. I guess it was out of print and they weren't in a rush to make a new one, knowing that a new movie was probably coming out before I knew that. So I picked up this UK edition, which is packed with stuff. I believe it's like, this is Village Roadshow and Warner Brothers official. So, with that in mind, let's go back to the original Matrix from 1999 by the Wachowskis. I think what I want to talk about is why this movie is so important in the world of science fiction and why it was such a turning point. One of the first things about the Matrix that's really important to me is the fact that it's a mashup of subgenres within science fiction. You have the hacker side of science fiction, the cyberpunk, the worlds of writers like William Gibson, and it's married with the kind of neo-noir that you see in films like Blade Runner, from stories by men like Philip K. Dick. Taking those two, putting them together, and on top of it you have once you step back and you understand more of the story, you realize that you're also in this kind of dystopian future, which to me has a lot of things similar with things along the lines of Alien. In fact, I see how the Alien films influence the Matrix and how the Matrix ends up influencing future Alien films, in visual style and the way that the future is depicted. Also, I will say that the Matrix does is it not just mashes up subgenres, but it takes from science fiction from other places, but not just science fiction. So part of the influence that the Wachowskis had making this movie, or making this story, I should say, was that it took a lot from other things that they loved, which was particularly like Hong Kong action flicks, like kung fu movies. And also on the other side of that, you have the kind of the John Woo style action films, movies like A Better Tomorrow and The Killer, films that are this kind of ballet of bullets. Those type of two very different styles of action films that come from Hong Kong, and then you marry it with the influence that what we consider anime. And it's funny looking back on interviews with the Wachowskis at the time, because they used the term Japanimation, which I hadn't heard in a long time. But when I got into anime, that's what it was called. It was called Japanimation. So you see the influence immediately of things like Ghost in the Shell, Akira, these kind of super futuristic but very Japanese interpretations, married with this kind of Hong Kong Chinese style of action. You take both of those and then you put it in a world of science fiction, world of authors like Gibson and Dick, and then you take on top of that the heavy influence of comic books in America. So it's this mishmash of all of these types of science fiction from different places. One thing I also learned, there's a great documentary on this edition called The Matrix Revisited, which it looks like it was made on the set of making part 2 and part 3. So that this is probably a 10-year-old documentary, at least at this point. But I didn't remember that the Wachowskis, or I should say, I didn't know that the Wachowskis had a background in comic book writing. So the fact that they had already written, I believe it's called Ecto Kid, they had written on Barker's Hellraiser and Nightbreeds as well. So they had this kind of comic book style of storytelling already kind of under their belt. So that definitely makes sense with putting all of this together and why it works. So let's start with who the Wachowskis are. So at the time of The Matrix in 1999, or even you should say in making The Matrix, so in the few years before it, the writer, director, producers team of the Wachowski brothers, that is Andy and Larry Wachowski, post the making of the Matrix Trilogy, both brothers have come out as trans women. So I believe even if you go on HBO Max to watch the films, they have gone back and changed the credit to Wachowski sisters, which is very cool. But so I'll just refer to them as Wachowskis because you know, at different times they were would differently be gendered. So they come from Ohio. They both of them went to college and dropped out and started all these different things before kind of landing into comic book writing and eventually writing screenplays. They dive into writing screenplays in 1995 with the movie Assassins, which is later made by Richard Donner, but did not like the experience of someone else interpreting their writing. So they had already, in pitching ideas for comics, had come up with the idea of The Matrix and decided it would be a better film experience than a comic book. So they pitch it to do that as a film, but the caveat being that they wanted to direct. So at this point, they're like, well, you guys are first-time directors. This is too huge of a project. We can't really just give that to you. So if we're interested in the screenplay, the idea sounds great, but we're not taking that leap. So what they do is they're like, well, give us a minute. They write, direct, and produce the movie Bound as a small production, small in 90s terminology, meaning a $5 million movie, and then turn around and say, look, everybody liked this movie. It was very successful. It's a cool, edgy film. We want to do a lot more like that. But this proves we can make a movie. And it takes a little convincing to go from, okay, let's make a $5 million movie to make a $100 million movie. But they do eventually get the green light to, to write, produce, and direct on The Matrix. And another interesting fact that I was not aware of, or don't remember being aware of, I should say, is that The Matrix was, from the get-go, conceived of as a trilogy, which surprises me, particularly with my 1999 eyes of looking at this very finished film. You know, like this is a story. It is encapsulated at a beginning, a middle, and end, and it opens up a world that you don't need to know what happens next in 1999 when you're watching it, right? So I'm surprised by that. More about that later. But so they come in, they're like, we're gonna make this trilogy. The screenplay goes to Warner Brothers because that's what they had to deal with. Warner Brothers is like agreed and swept it right up, and they're like, we love it, but we don't understand it. So they go back to their comic book friends and have storyboards made like comics of the sequences to explain better exactly how they envisioned. They also end up kind of outsourcing to other people that they know from comics to do concept art for what the real world is. So that leads me to want to step back a little bit. But quickly to wrap up on the Wachowskis, they write Assassin, they write, produce, and direct Bound. They do the Matrix Trilogy because the other two come out in the same year, 2003. After that, as a team, they go on to create Speed Racer, Cloud Atlas, Jupiter Ascending, and the series Sense8. Also in there, and this is another thing I might have known but forgot, because it's been some time, V for Vendetta. They wrote and produced but did not direct, which I thought was interesting. And also produced the movie Ninja Assassin in 2009. That's a cool little movie, so that's neat. Right, and their comics background, like I said, was on Ecto Kid, Hellraiser, and Nightbreed. For those who have not seen the original Matrix, because that's possible in this world, hard for me to fathom, just because it's such a game-changer movie that just like made everything wide open and huge again. But if you haven't, real quick, I will say that it is a story of a man who online goes by the name of Neo. He is a hacker at night. By day, he works at a software firm as a programmer, and he spends his nights trolling kind of this early internet, looking for references to the Matrix, and what he doesn't understand is what this is. So that is his question, trying to find out what he's hearing these little things about here and there, of these mentions of the word Matrix. So his key quest is to track down this one mysterious figure who goes by the name of Morpheus. And eventually, he is contacted through his computer and told to follow the White Rabbit. At that moment, he gets customers arrive because he does some underground dealings, and they invite him to go clubbing for the night. He notices that one of the women in the group has a tattoo of a white rabbit, so he follows them. He goes to a club, which definitely reminds me of what clubs were like in 1999, and is approached by a woman that goes by the name Trinity, who he's heard of in kind of hacking world, and is told to basically trust her and to trust Morpheus. All of this leads to him to realize that in his quest to find Morpheus, he has been kind of under surveillance by a group of agents, and he's being pursued. So it becomes this kind of two-layered story. Him trying to escape the agents and trying to find more about Morpheus in the Matrix, and when it all collides and things open up, and that's when things really get interesting. So just for that little sum up, I should go into who we're talking about in those characters. So Neo is played by Keanu Reeves, who we've definitely talked on this show about before when we talked about Bram Stoker's Dracula. Off the top of my head, some Keanu Reeves aside from Dracula, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, of course. But he was very much kind of, I would say, even a little past the height of his career. Like this was kind of like a turning point career. This is probably what leads to him being able to have an action type future with movies like John Wick. Trinity is played by Carrie Ann Moss. Before that, she had been pretty much a TV actress, a little bit here and there. Besides The Matrix, goes on to do Memento. Red Planet. As far as what else, I would also, more recently, I would say she had a great run on Jessica Jones as an excellent kind of villainous character. Then, of course, you have Lawrence Fishburne, who actually I've also mentioned on the show before when I did my Nightmare on Elm Street box set, because he was in Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. He also, I'd say his kind of like real beginnings is in Apocalypse Now. But other kind of sci-fi genre work, let's see. Oh, right, he's in Predators. He's also in the more modern Superman movies. He shows up in Ant-Man and Wasp. So that's, he's kind of got some DC and Marvel ties at this point. So he's got a pretty solid genre foot as well. And then the other person that I would definitely, put in the top list is kind of the lead villain, the lead agent, Agent Smith, is Hugo Weaving, having just done a rewatch also on the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Those are probably his two biggest trilogies. Or in Lord of the Rings, obviously, he's Elrond the elf. He's the Elf Lord Elrond, I should say. In V for Vendetta, he is V. Cloud Atlas, Captain America, Transformers. So he's another person who, the Wolfman, he's another person who's got a steady foot in genre film work as well. So, all of them become fixtures for the entire trilogy. And, the things that I really wanted to just point out that I think make this film still work, because it does. That was what was interesting. I hadn't watched the film in probably about 10 years. And it was amazing how well visually it holds up. It is a groundbreaking film for visual effects. It is the invention of bullet time. And bullet time only happens because there's this need to kind of replicate in live action what you can do in animation because of that anime influence. I mean, there is no Matrix with that look or quality without Ghost in the Shell or Aeon Flux or any of those things that came before it. Aeon Flux, obviously, it's not anime, but I mean, animation itself. It's this trying to replicate animation in real life, and that only comes from people who are steeped in what's going on in genre at the time, you know, because that is where science fiction was going in the 90s. It was animation. So it's amazing now to see how well bullet time works still. And it's funny to watch in the documentaries because they talk about how this is just the first step. This is going to blow up and this is going to become more common in a few years. And it's true. I mean, bullet time has become something we take for granted in film. But if you're not sure, and I should have an image that I can pop up here, but it's essentially what it is it's created by not just green screen. They use 120 digital still cameras in a circle that are used to kind of create a 360 approach to everything that's in the center so that they can eventually digitally move the characters in anything that's being filmed. So the subject can be slowed down, stopped, and rotated, like you would see in video games. So it's amazing to watch it, and it's still stunning. It's still really amazing to watch. It's also amazing to note that, and this is pretty much, I came into it with this knowledge of this is what this movie does well, you know, on this, God knows how many views in I am at this point, because I've seen it so many times in the past and had a break from it, I guess you could say. But the learning how much effort was put into making all of the primary actors proficient at martial arts was astounding. So what happens is, to create that part of it, the Wachowskis decide that they want to pursue the person who made the best fight choreography in the business at that time. And that was Yao Ping, who had done, I believe, he had worked with Jet Li on The Legend, and I think that was the movie that they referenced as being the kind of, that's what we want. And they're able to convince him eventually to come and be part of the production. But they set up a 2-month training with Yao Ping's team that start the actors from scratch, learning how to punch, how to kick, and eventually to the point where they are doing their own stunts. Because, and this is another thing that it does, this is another first, is it's bringing wire techniques that are used in Hong Kong action, bringing that to America as well. So it's kind of marrying all of these things, but the amount of kind of dedication from everyone involved to get to the point where the actors could do their own stunts in most of the scenes, because we want to see their faces doing these things in the wires, is impressive. Like, months of training. So the fight choreography is then done by Yao Ping. So the next year he would go on to work on Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. So that's kind of just tells you where the world was going. I mean, he would go on to work with Quentin Tarantino on the Kill Bill films. Pretty much most international action, like kung fu style action films he's involved with after this point, because he's such an important kind of cog in that wheel of how that style comes to American movie making. Some of the movies that I think or what he's famous for, I should say. Okay, stunt coordinator on the original Drunken Master. That's pretty huge. Action coordinator for Once Upon a Time in China, which is epic. Where so there's a Jackie Chan, there's a Jet Li, Iron Monkey. Iron Monkey is probably just one of that's an excellent action film, action director on that. Tai Chi Master, another great Jet Li film. Fist of Legend, like I said, that's kind of like a modernization, like a retelling of a Bruce Lee. What I grew up knowing as a Chinese Connection. So they bring him over to do that, and that just changes the industry essentially by marrying the Hong Kong style with the American filmmaking style. So yeah, changes action movies too. Colors. All right. stepping back a little bit, another thing that I want to talk about is the use of color in this film. The greens, the world that is the normal world, the world that we are convinced is the real world that Neo lives in his everyday life, is in these green hues to make it artificial and ugly on purpose. It's very gray. There's talk in the features of production designers intentionally putting grids within that world, so everything seems to be in like wireframe existence, grid-like green, and to make it look like it is machine made, so that manufactured look of the real world. Then the contrast, what is kind of the true reality, they shift from that to almost this kind of blue, and the world has a much more human tone to it, much less hard angles, a much softer look and feel, because this is where the real humans live, so to say. So that contrast visually is very strong in this film. It's also hard to come away from the 1999 Matrix without like showing how it changed stylistically. Like the look of the wardrobe for the characters takes this very kind of underground, what is associated with like punk and goth is kind of used in a way in these characters that makes them representative now of the future. So it's taking this underground look and making it super modern to that point where it is the future. Also interesting to note how not just through the colors, but everything in the real world that we start with is also very dull and worn down. There's nothing exciting about the world until you are kind of like freed of this what's possible in the Matrix. Music is another thing that's very important to this film, just like how costuming and kind of this underground style, using electronica, very traditional symphonic score mixed with a techno score, or soundtrack that is predominantly techno or electronica, also kind of takes it from this underground feel to this future feel, which I think is very important to the movie also, and sets that tone, and kind of also, like the clothing, sets the tone of what movies of science fiction future kind of in the future will then sound like, and that becomes a sound that we hear in science fiction after this point more and more, I believe. Let's see, like I said, we had the neo-noirness, that kind of Blade Runner-ness of this film. Yeah, the action sequences, once they like full on, once Neo is in the kind of the battle of it, the kind of that ode to John Woo's way of shooting fight scenes, with, you know, that the ballet of bullets. It's just amazing how marrying that with the martial arts style of the wire tricks just makes everything have so much flow, even with the violence of it. Leather and vinyl brings underground culture to like not just the mainstream, but it also makes it to the future. Iconic look that influences movies forever. I was going to say genre movies forever, but I think this iconic look it influences all movies at that time period. And really, you take all of that together. So you take like this underground look and style, this undergroundness of the music of the time, and it kind of makes you, it puts you in this world of where in the real world that we live in, which is, we assume, the world that Neo starts in. It is the world where it's the hackers and the punks and the goths versus the kind of like the salarymen, the buttoned down businessmen of America, or the world. So it's the warring factions of the underground kind of trying to kind of scrape away from the existence of mundaneness that comes from this other side, which is very much hard with the whole concept of this movie. From every aspect of it is the fact that this is not your identity, that the world has much more to offer, and that you need to free yourself of these trappings before you can become who you really are. And that's really kind of the overall moral message of the film, is to not give in to what society tells you you must be. And the idea that reality is a construct. Reality is this what society is telling you it is. It doesn't mean it's what it truly is, not true reality. So there's so much. I remember in one of the documentaries, Keanu Reeves says that he was given kind of like a reading list of science fiction and philosophy that he was to read before the script to understand everything they were trying to get done there. And I think that's amazing. So you're seeing all of this work together in something that just becomes, not only strikes a chord and gets this underground following, cult-like following, it ends up becoming fairly mainstream, which is surprising. There's also the concept that when Neo is offered the opportunity to choose between the blue pill and the red pill, to choose to expand his understanding and to learn more, or to walk away and forget it all, there is this kind of metaphor of opening one's mind through drugs. So it's in its own way in like this kind of modernization of Huxley's Doors of Perception in many ways, which as a kid growing up who became fascinated with the band The Doors, I read reading The Doors of Perception. I'm sure I did not understand at all as a teenager, but this kind of idea that our minds can be expanded through hallucinogenics. I love that there's still a tie to that as well with your gateway in. And yeah, the overlying idea that reality is a social construct, reality is what we as a society believe it to be, is particularly true throughout the films. But looking back on it now, knowing what we know now of the Wachowskis, and I've read mentions of this online, that there was this kind of understanding of the concepts of the film before they came out as trans, that it was also a metaphor for that. And that kind of takes us to another place of saying, well, not only is reality a social construct, but, get into our Judith Butler and say that gender is a social construct. So it all works together, and it's this fluidity that we have to understand of how gender can be a fluid thing, reality can be as well. So it is interesting to see all of that, and kind of this like looking back now and seeing even more layers of what they were trying to show is very powerful. How much is said in this film that became like a Hollywood blockbuster, which is just unheard of, right? You expect something to have this kind of deep, meaningful, to just either kind of get buried or be kind of like so esoteric that most people haven't seen it. But for a movie that appealed to the masses to be something telling you, open up your mind to bigger understandings of not just the world, but who you are and how you fit in it. And everything becoming about having faith in yourself to be your true self is, that's pretty powerful stuff. So that's pretty amazing. As I said earlier, the idea that of all these different subgenres that they're grabbing from, I definitely feel that once you do see what the real world is, you end up in this apocalyptic future where humans are now a slave race to this kind of alien overlord, and we live in these pods where we are kind of kept in this constant dream state. Feel this kind of alien horror. Like I said before, I feel that it has this kind of influence from alien films. So like literally the movie Alien and those films are definitely adding to the look of it. I definitely feel that those pods definitely feel like they could have come out of like a world of xenomorphs. But I also, watching it now, I see how even you could say it may have influenced how the Prometheus films end up looking in some ways. So it's interesting to see where it kind of fits on a timeline of science fiction and seeing what it has taken from and what it has added to the kind of the ethos of what can be. So I think that's pretty interesting too. The idea of, much like a Luke Skywalker character or a Harry Potter type figure, where you have the kind of prophesized that is going to save us all. So Neo coming into that, it becomes him not just understanding and learning and believing what this world really is and what he has been living in is just a simulation of life. But him, it doesn't really work. Like, he can't become who he truly has the potential to be as the chosen one until he believes in himself. Not just believing, he has to first believe the situation he's in and that that's the truth. He has to believe the truth that is true. And then he has to believe that he really is that figure. And it takes till the very end, of course, because that's how drama works, for him to kind of come to that realization. And that's key, not just in kind of like arc storytelling, but also in the idea of the one, the savior. So at the same time, all these kind of groundbreaking things, again, we're taking from pre-existing, because that's very much a trope, a European trope at that. So it predates American science fiction to make films in that manner or tell stories in that way. So again, we're taking from all of these different elements, mythologies, epic storytelling, fairy tales even, then mixing it with all of the Asian cinema and American comic books and science fiction. Again, so we're just adding to that mixing pot of all the things that make this story work. And one last thing of note is that this film really can't happen without the payphone, and that's another thing that is curious. The payphone is the portal. A phone is a portal. A landline is a portal. It's so strange to think how that might be an alien concept that may not work in the future. So that's something I'll have to look out for when I do finally see the new film. But yeah, that struck me as odd. Like, if we had to do this today and we had to use payphones and portals, that would be tough. There would not be too many opportunities to get them out of there. So just a little side note. Things that I had not yet mentioned. A major component of the look of this film is cinematographer Bill Pope. Now, Bill Pope I've talked about on this show before because he was a cinematographer on Army of Darkness. So Bill Pope comes from the world of music videos. Cameraman, cinematographer, director of photography. He, his first film as director of photography was Sam Raimi's Darkman, 1990. Then Army of Darkness, like I said, Fire in the Sky. He did Bound with the Wachowskis, and almost because that was so effective, did not want to make The Matrix with them because he didn't know how they would work having more money, because it's his experience. And many people say that people who work well with limitations, that's what makes them thrive. So he didn't know if that would translate to them having a big budget film. So he was hesitant. After the Matrix Trilogy, so he goes back with Sam Raimi to do Spider-Man 2 and 3. Also does Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, one of my favorites, which leads him to then do Baby Driver. So working with Edgar Wright on those films. So Bill Pope's camera work is definitely a huge part of the look and feel of this film. And his ability to know how to work in tandem with the special effects crews and the action fighting crews and the Steadicam operators and working with them as a DP. So Bill Pope definitely had a huge part in this film. Who else? Production designer Owen Patterson, of course, works closely with all of these, and the costume designer. All of it works together, and it just creates this amazing iconic imagery that we get to know for The Matrix. Also crazy to learn on these watching these documentaries that going into making the movie, Keanu Reeves had neck surgery, so he couldn't train with the rest of the actors for the first half of their martial arts training, and that also affected what he could do once he get in. He was related to spinal work that I think affected his legs, so he couldn't learn kicking right away. He had to start punching, and then while making the movie, Hugo Weaving kind of ends up having to get hip surgery. But he's able to go back in. So it's like, there was a lot on the line. A lot of these people were really putting themselves out there. And even through all of that, end up completing most of that work themselves. They did have stunt people, but predominantly end up going with the actual actors whenever they could, which is common. But this is a little bit over the top. So, all of that to say, past versions, really, these are the only versions I kind of know of. There is the traditional DVD with the clamshell style, not my favorite, the board type. Special features on this were behind the scenes documentaries, cast and crew commentary, music only audio track, Follow White Rabbit and Take the Red Pill, more mysterious mind bending extras, la la la. So most of that is on here. So yeah, most of this information does make it to this edition on the Blu-ray. So yeah, the DVD, this is the standard Warner Brothers official release from 2000. This movie came out in 99. The DVD came out right after. I want to say like 2000, 2001. Copyright in 99. So yeah, right after. Pretty sure the first time I watched it, I rented it on video and then bought it on DVD once I had a DVD player. And of course, the other thing that I had was the soundtrack, because this soundtrack is just awesome. It was like everything amazing at the time. We had Marilyn Manson, Propellerheads, Ministry, Meat Beat Manifesto, Prodigy, Rob Zombie, the Deftones, Monster Magnet, Rammstein, Rage Against the Machine, and really there's like an entire, there could be like a 3-disc edition if you include all of the kind of score music plus all of the other kind of like techno and electronica that is involved in this. But yeah, this score, I bought this, immediately. I think it was actually because I worked at a Hot Topic at the time. I was probably listening to the soundtrack before I got to see the movie. So yeah, those were kind of like the standard stuff I think pretty much everybody has. Like I said, the Blu-ray edition I bought, I went with the UK versions because I wanted to buy all of them together as a trilogy set. And I could not find an American or domestic version that did that. But this is Village Roadshow Pictures, Warner Brothers Blu-ray. I believe it was just a matter of this was the one that was in stock. But yeah, so here's the kind of quality. I will say on this viewing, like I said, it's been about 10 years since I'd seen the movie. Maybe a little more, seeing it all the way through, like sit down, start to finish. Because it's just a movie I've seen a million times and would just, whenever it was on TV, would watch. I would say I was just amazed how well it holds up. It's a movie I talk about often when I teach as something that kind of, like I say, it's a game changer film. It changes the genre, it changes action, it changes science fiction. And it changes American perceptions of what those things are based on their influence from other national cinemas. Looking at it today, it still looks stunning. It's still amazing, it's still a great story. Even knowing it, you still get wrapped up in it because the acting is tremendous. The entirety of the storytelling is absorbing. It's an engaging film, no matter how many times you see it, and you stick around for just all the amazing action sequences as well. And it's just impressive. It's just an impressive film still. If anything, there was maybe 1 or 2 moments where it was just like, oh, the special effects could have been a little better there, but that was like mostly not like bullet time work or wire work action. It was more, there's a sequence early on where Agent Smith tells Mr. Anderson that you can't make a call if you can't speak, and his mouth closes, and there are certain shots that don't match up because it's a blending very early on in 99 of physical makeup and digital to do the effect for it to close, and then what it looks like when it's closed, they don't quite match. That is so nitpicky because that's kind of like the only thing. Really, it's just, and it becomes a believable world that they create in it. So, I mean, like I said, I'm doing this rewatch. This is the week between Christmas and New Year's, and I'm doing the rewatch so that I can watch the new Matrix 4. So we'll see how the rest of the series holds up for me. But I will say I still love this movie. It's still a classic. So don't just watch the new one. I would say definitely go back and start over. Give the original Matrix another view. Totally worth it still. Alright guys, thanks for hanging out with me today on Horror Academic, Sci-Fi Academic Edition. So next up I'm going to have to watch 2 and 3 and see how they hold up after all this time too. But as we're looking right now, the Matrix is still great. See you next time.